This is the podcast, Diary of a CEO, hosted by Stephen Bartlett. He is best known as an entrepreneur, investor, author. He launched his podcast in September 2017, and the show has grown from a small entrepreneurship podcast into one of the most listened to podcasts in the world.
This is the Auditor, Chris Creary, host of I Made a Podcast, Faith Fight Podcast, and Podcast Production Labs. He's looking into this podcast to understand why it's been so successful and what he can learn from it. What you're about to hear is real. The podcasts are not clients, at least not yet. These are real shows created by real hosts being put under the microscope. Each episode, one podcast steps in, gets fully broken down, evaluated, and challenged across content, structure, and growth. No guessing, no sugarcoating, just honest insight on what's working, what's not, and what it's going to take to level up. This is where podcasts get better or get exposed. Welcome to the podcast Audit.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of I Made a Podcast. My name is Chris Creary. I'm so glad that you're here. Now, you may not have heard of me before, but you must have heard of the podcast Diary of a CEO. And here's what you need to know. It's one of the world's most downloaded podcasts, and it's hosted by Stephen Bartlett, and it's not hard to understand why it's so popular. Every single episode pulls back the curtain on how the world's most successful people actually think, their mindset, their failures, their turning points in their life. And it's long-form content, it's honest, and it's engineered to keep you locked in from the first minute to the last. And we're using it today as our benchmark, not because it's perfect, but because it's the clearest example of what intentional elite podcasting actually looks like. This is I Made a Podcast, and we are starting another podcast audit. So here's something that might make you uncomfortable. The podcast that you've been putting hours into, the one that you've been scripting, recording, editing, might be failing for a reason that has nothing to do with your effort. It's not the microphone, it's not your voice, it's not even your content. It's something most podcasters never look directly at. And because they never look at it, they never fix it. And because they never fix it, they quit. Usually around episode 12, blaming that the algorithm or blaming their niche or bad timing or whatever. They just give up on their podcast. Now today we're gonna audit the real mechanics behind what makes a podcast elite, using one of the most successful shows ever produced as our benchmark. And more importantly, we're going to talk about exactly where the gap is and how to actually close that gap. So let's get into this episode. First, we're going to talk about content and structure. Now, the Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett ranks exceptionally high in podcast content and structure, scoring around 9.5 out of 10 in this category. The show has a crystal clear identity, which is centered around entrepreneurship, psychology, success, personal growth, and high performance thinking. And every episode is designed to create emotional engagement and intellectual curiosity, often combining vulnerability with deep insight. Now, the structure feels conversational and natural, yet highly intentional, with strong hooks, emotional moments, and strategic pacing throughout the entire discussion. Guest selection is one of the podcast's greatest strengths, featuring globally recognized entrepreneurs, scientists, athletes, psychologists, and cultural figures who align perfectly with the show's themes. The storytelling approach keeps listeners invested for long periods of time, making even multi-hour episodes feel engaging. Now, the first place most podcasters fall apart isn't the recording room, it's before that. It's in the answer to this question. What is this show actually for? Now, the Diary of a CEO is hyper-focused, business, mindset, high performance. You know exactly what you're getting before the first word is even spoken. Most podcasts, that's a blur to them. If your podcast just focuses on a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it means absolutely nothing to everyone. So the second problem is structure. Great podcasts aren't just conversations. They're engineered experiences. Even when they feel spontaneous, there is an intentional arc that successful podcasts follow. Now, most shows, they ramble, they meander, they trust the moment to carry them through, and the moment almost never does. And then there's storytelling. This is where real separation happens. Elite podcasts understand that information alone doesn't keep people. Tension does. Emotion does. The feeling that something is at stake that keeps people in the car even after they parked and they've reached home and they're hungry, they want to go in for dinner, but they can't turn off their car because they want to keep listening to this episode. So ask yourself, honestly, does your podcast leave people with something they feel or just something they know? A typical podcast scores around 6.1 on content. Diary of a CEO scores a 9.6. Now that gap is almost entirely explained by three things: clarity of purpose, intentional structure, and emotional storytelling. Now, the next section of the podcast audit is audio quality and production. Now, in this category, the Diary of a CEO performs at an elite level, ranks at 9.5 out of 10. The sound quality is consistently clean, balanced, and professional, creating a premium listening experience across both audio and video platforms as well. Editing is subtle but highly effective, removing distractions while maintaining authenticity and conversational flow. Music intros and transitions are used sparingly and strategically to support the emotional tone rather than to overwhelm the content. The production style feels cinematic without being overproduced, which helps preserve the intimacy while still sounding world-class. Long episode lengths are sustained successfully because of the pacing, the sound design, and the conversational dynamics that maintain a listener's attention. So let's talk about the thing that matters most, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong about it. Yes, audio quality, it matters. Poor sound kills credibility instantly. Now, if someone has to strain to hear you, or if the room is echoing, or if the levels are all over the place, those listeners are gone. You don't even have a second chance on that. But here is where most people get it wrong. They think that upgrading the microphone is the move that they need to make. They spend $300 or even $500 or more on new microphones and wonder why nothing has changed in the amount of listeners that they get with their podcast. The production gap isn't about hardware. It's about editing flow, not just mistakes. It's about understanding that music and sound design aren't decorations. They're the emotional architecture. The right music under the right moment doesn't just sound good, it tells your listeners how to feel. So average podcasts in this category score around 6.4 in production. Elite shows like this one, The Diary of a CEO, scored 9.4. The difference is rarely about the equipment, it's about the intention behind every single audio decision. So moving right along, the next section is branding and presentation. So Diary of a CEO ranks extremely high in branding and presentation, earning roughly 9.3 out of 10. The title itself is memorable and psychologically intriguing because it feels personal while also communicating ambition and authority. The visual branding is clean, modern, instantly recognizable across whichever platform you're on, and episode titles are particularly strong and written with high curiosity language that drives clicks without feeling misleading. And that's very important for podcasters out there when they're titling their episodes. The show's descriptions and thumbnails are optimized to create emotional intrigue and maximize discoverability across YouTube, social media, streaming platforms, and promotional content. The branding remains highly consistent, reinforcing the identity of the show as a premium, thought-provoking interview platform. Now, here's a question that most podcasters have never seriously asked themselves. If someone sees your podcast cover artwork in a list of 50 shows or whatever, what happens? Do they stop? Do they click? Or do they scroll past it without a second thought? Branding is how your show is perceived before someone even hits play. And most podcasters treat it like an afterthought. A quick design thrown together, a title that makes sense in the moment, a description that is technically describes the show, but it doesn't make anyone want to click on it or listen to it. Your episode title is a sales pitch every single time. If it doesn't create curiosity, tension, or a reason for someone to click, it's costing you listeners you'll never know you lost. The Diary of a CEO's episode titles are a masterclass in click psychology. They make you feel like you'll be missing something critical if you skipped it. And that's not on accident, that's a craft. The average scores for podcasters in this category is 5.8, but elite branding scores, like this one from Diary of a CEO, is 9.3. And unlike production, you don't need a budget to close that gap. You need intentionality and an honest look at whatever your show looks like and what it sounds like, and asking yourself, is this something that people will look at and take seriously? The next section is consistency and publishing. Now, this one is simple, but it's not easy. But it is simple. Podcasts that win are consistent. They're ruthlessly consistent. They show up on schedule that their audience can set a clock to, and over time, that consistency compounds into something powerful, which is trust. Most shows don't make it to 20 episodes, and the ones that fall off usually tell themselves the same story. The content wasn't ready, life got busy, they needed to relaunch with better branding, etc., etc., etc. But the real story is almost always that they were making it up as they went along. No production calendar, no back catalog strategy, no plan beyond recording the next episode, and you just did it whenever you felt like doing it. The gap here is very drastic. An average podcast scores around 5.8 on publishing and consistency. Diary of a CEO scored 9.5. And unlike content or production, this gap doesn't require skill. It requires a decision to show up and show up and show up again and show up consistently. That's all it requires. In this category, Diary of a CEO performs at an elite level with a score of 9.5 out of 10. The show releases episodes consistently and has built a massive back catalog that can encourage binge listening, so you can sit down and listen to episodes till whenever. Right? Now, this consistency has trained audience to expect ongoing value and has helped the show maintain its momentum both in podcast rankings and in social media visibility. The podcast balances evergreen conversations with timely cultural topics, allowing episodes to remain relevant long after its release. Its consistency reflects the operational discipline of a media company rather than a casual content creator. So if you want to take podcasting seriously, make sure that you are seriously considering how consistent you can be in releasing your podcast. Next is distribution and accessibility. Most podcasters think distribution means uploading to Spotify and Apple and calling it a day. That's not the strategy. That's survival. Elite shows like this one treat every platform differently. They understand that YouTube isn't just a place for the video version, it's a search engine. Show notes aren't a formality, they're an SEO opportunity. Transcripts aren't extra work, they're how people who couldn't listen can still find you. The average podcast scores 5 out of 10 on distributions, which means it's also the one with the most headroom for growth. So if your metadata is thin, your show notes are vague, and if you're not on YouTube, you're probably invisible to a massive portion of the audience that would love what you are making. They just can't find you. A central hub, maybe a website with all your episodes and your archives and your story, isn't optional for serious podcasters. It's the difference between renting a space on someone else's platform and actually building something you own. The Diary of a CEO ranks at 9.2 out of 10 in terms of distribution and accessibility, mainly because of its massive multi-platform presence and strong content ecosystem. The podcast is available across all major streaming platforms while also maintaining a dominant presence on YouTube, where clips and full episodes reach millions of viewers. The show leverages detailed episode clips, searchable titles, and optimized metadata to increase discoverability. Its websites, its social channels, and its video strategy work together to create multiple audience for its listeners. Now, while transcripts and accessibility tools could still expand further, the overall distribution strategy is far ahead of most podcasters in the industry right now. So the next section in this podcast audit is audience growth and engagement. Now, downloads are a vanity metric if you don't know what they mean to you. The best podcasters are data-driven. They know where people drop off. They know which episodes got shared and which ones didn't. They know what their audience responds to, not because they guessed, but because they've tracked it. They've listened and they adjusted. But beyond data, the most powerful thing a podcast can build is community, not just listeners. People who feel like they belong to something. People who would notice if you disappeared. People who tell their friends not just to check out your show, but to join something. The average engagement scores for all of the podcasts out there is a 5 out of 10. And that gap comes down to this. Do you treat your audience as data points or as people that you're in a relationship with? Social media, email lists, community spaces, these aren't just marketing tools. They're how you stay in the conversation in between episodes. Now, for the Diary of a CEO, it scored a 9.3 out of 10 because it understands how to create highly shareable and emotional, impactful content. The podcast generates strong audience retention through compelling hooks, deep emotional conversations, and moments designed for clipping and social media distribution. Its social strategy is especially powerful using short-form video content to continuously attract new audiences. Listener engagement is reinforced through comments, discussions, and interviews that provoke debate, and emotionally vulnerable storytelling that makes audience feel personally connected to the conversations. So the podcast functions not only as a show, but as an ongoing media conversation that is online. Now, the final section in the podcast audit for this podcast is monetization and long-term strategy. And let's end where most podcasters never get to, the strategy. Not the tactics, not sponsorship, but the strategy, the big picture. The reason the podcast exists beyond the joy of just making a podcast. Now, the Diary of a CEO scores a perfect 10 here, not because it makes the most money, but because every episode is a deliberate piece of a much larger ecosystem. It builds a brand, it opens doors, it creates leverage that extends far beyond the podcast itself. Most shows score around 4.8 in this category, and the reason isn't that they lack the opportunity, it's that they lack the vision. They are podcasting without asking what the podcast is actually building towards. So let me ask you that question. What is your podcast actually building? If you can't answer that question clearly, every episode you've recorded is just content, not progress. Monetization follows strategy. Sponsorships come to shows that have built something worth sponsoring. Products to sell to audiences who trust the host. Partnerships happen between shows that know what they stand for. The vision has to come first. Now, the Diary of a CEO ranks near the top of the industry in monetization and long-term growth strategy, scoring a perfect 10 out of 10. The podcast is deeply integrated into Flight Story and Flight Fun, making it a part of a much larger business ecosystem rather than a standalone content project. Sponsorships, partnerships, personal branding, business ventures, audience trust, all work together strategically. The podcast drives the influence, visibility, and commercial opportunities simultaneously. Every episode strengthens Stephen Bartlett's authority, expands the audience's funnel, and supports broader business objectives. This long-term strategic integration is one of the major reasons that this podcast has become one of the most successful interview shows in the world. Yes, I said it. So here is what the audit tells us. The gap between the average podcast and an elite podcast isn't a gap in talent. It isn't a gap in equipment. It's a gap in systems, clarity, and the willingness to treat your show like it matters before the numbers tell you that it does. Most podcasts fail quietly. They don't get canceled. They just stop showing up. The host loses momentum, the audience never quite materializes, and eventually the feed goes cold. But the ones that win, they win on purpose. Every category that we've talked about today, they're all learnable. They're all buildable, and none of them require luck. They require you to look honestly at where you are and then decide where you want to be, and then close the gap one decision at a time. And that starts today. So if this episode made you think differently about your show, share it with someone else who's building a podcast. And if you want to go deeper on any of these categories, subscribe to I Made a Podcast, and we're just getting started. I've put the complete scoring for this podcast audit on my Substack page, so you can go there and read it in detail and see why Diary of a CEO actually scored what it did in this podcast audit. You could see all of the criteria that I used to come up with the scores for this podcast audit for Diary of a CEO. And remember, the best time to start a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. So go ahead and make it happen. And you'll hear from me again next week on I Made a Podcast. Peace.